So today we'll be talking a little bit about Figma design systems and design systems in general, and just want to get an understanding, and feel free to pop into the chat. How many of you are aware of design systems, work with design systems, or just put into the chat, what is your experience with design systems in general? And while you type that out, and that can help gauge kind of our conversation as to where we're gonna swim towards. But for anyone who is new to our organization and listening to our jams with us, we have a QTBIPOC Design playlist. Feel free to check it out, see some of the tracks that we have in there. Super queer, I love it. Yes, and then just at a high level, as you type in your experience with design systems, that's really going to be the meat of our conversation today. And depending on if we have time or not at the end, we can go into either Q&A or additional chat. And for anyone who's new, welcome. For anyone who's returning, welcome back. Happy to celebrate 2022 with you. For those of you who are new, QTBIPOC Design stands for Queer, Trans, Black, Indigenous, People of Color Design. We offer free and accessible design education to queer BIPOC communities. And our goal is to help create pathways of education, mentorship, and networking opportunities for our community. And we have been around now for a little over a year, and we're just so excited to continue what we've been doing with you all. Let's see real quick. We have more than enough people to do the intro. So let me go to the slide real quick. Let me just read through some of the comments. Figma, Adobe XD, using Figma and Sketch. Heard of Figma, thought it was going to be heavy on design systems, turned out not so much. Did a study of it when I was starting out. Change was exciting, have basic understanding design system, want to learn more adding. I use Figma, love variants. I had last year use Figma and Sketch, prefer Figma, use Sketch. Okay, awesome. Great to kind of turn out with some of your feedback. And I also have the comments running. And so feel free, if at any moment you want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand or type it into the comment box, and we'll answer questions as it comes across. And then we have awesome Kenny, who can help also moderate as well. If there's any emergencies, Kenny can help assist. Thank you, Kenny. Yes. Awesome. Beautiful. So design systems, let's get into it. And we'll first talk about just broadly design systems at a large, and then we'll go into Figma as a tool. And for those of you who are new, we'll give plenty of time for us to just explore, peck around, and for you to kind of learn some of the tools, capabilities, and functionalities as it pertains to design system. And just to preface, for anyone who's new or haven't been a part of our Figma tutorial, we have a couple sessions of our UX nights of the year dedicated to learning more about Figma. We have previous training of Figma, also accessible on our YouTube. So feel free for intro crash course. We did one last year, earlier on in the year. And so highly recommend checking that out. And yeah, check out some of our other tutorials on our YouTube channel as well. Awesome. So first things first, what are design systems? Design systems are basically what the word implies. Design system. It is a system, an architecture in which we have put attributes of design into it so that we can replicate it, we can repurpose it, we can teach others. Just think about it as a Bible or an artifact, or just something that you're able to put information in, and that other people are able to disseminate it, and also other systems are able to disseminate it as well. And what's really cool over the past few years, especially with the rise of these more native web design applications such as Sketch, Figma, Adobe XD, is the capacity for our design systems to be dynamic as a part of our designs. And so way back in the day when I first started designing, we were using Photoshop to create responsive design for websites. And there was no such thing as a system, no such thing as an element that could be updated across the whole system. And so as design systems become updated into the future, the dark ages. Yeah, you know. Yes, we are getting more and more capacity to create dynamic, fluid designs and are able to make it smart as well moving into the future. And really, one big component and piece of it was this need for variability in our designs, right? So as our different screen sizes, resolutions have shifted all the way from big TVs, right? People are creating interfaces for gigantic TV displays, billboards, all the way down to the size of somebody's watch, right? That interface and the capacity for websites, for example, to be able to translate easily between the two spectrums at the ends. We've created systems to be able to unify and create a responsive framework that can adapt and be fluid. Additionally to there, we've gone from having one designer, right, at an organization to having hundreds of designers within a product, an organization, maybe even thousands for some larger tech companies. And so with that, creating systems in which people can talk to one another. And so here's a couple examples of different design systems that I highly recommend everyone to check out. Spectrum, Adobe's design system. These are all websites too that you can check out. I should put the URL here. But if you search Adobe Spectrum, you'll get the website that has their design systems, which has information about what it is, the components, icons, elements, different plugins, different UI kits, fonts. You also have Google's material design, right? This was one of the biggest ones that had come out first many, many years ago that really set the precedence for what is it to create a website as a design system, design library. And then we also have Salesforce Lightning Design System, which is more on the simple side, but it gets the job done with all the different elements. And so what we're seeing are these big, big brands starting to create these websites in a way to also share and disseminate information outside of the company. So oftentimes, right, we'll create all these files and stuff like that within our organization, but let's say you're an external vendor or partner or somebody else creating something for this organization. How are you also going to get that information? And so broadly speaking, a design system is an artifact, a thing that houses all of this information about design of our files, our products, that basically somebody else or a system can then take to then extend our work into either additional pages, other products, or to iterate on it. Yeah? Cool. And so we touched on some of the benefits of using a design system, and a design system touches on many, many things. And this isn't all of it, but definitely feel free to add any additional ones in the comments that you can think of. But really a design system, the first thing that it helps you achieve is speed and scalability, right? Speed, meaning the ability for us to get from point A to point B and how long that takes. So imagine you are creating a design comp, right, for a newsletter, for example, when you have all the different icons, right, the fonts, and even the components, blocks of content, media, typography, however you combine things in a set place, imagine how quickly you can come up with stuff versus having to hunt and create it from scratch. Also, another really big one is team unification. So when we create this system that has all of these attributes or things involved, we can essentially bring organizations, people together to create things together in a shared language. We also have potential to improve collaboration, potentially improving transparency across system, right? Because we have essentially created this language, and at the same time, think about a website. A website is live, it is always on. And so using that in a way to create these systems, we have now something that everybody can see, right? Not just people within our organization. And then lastly, something that I think is really one of the most important pillars of a design system is the educational capacity. And so what we've created, it has the ability to teach other people, people who may not know anything about our work or the company or the organization, to read on it and then to use it to then create. And so this in turn really helps to up-level the speed of developing something. And scalability. Scalability is the word that pertains to the ability for it to grow. Things could grow either with different arms, or it's like different pages, different features, or it can replicate itself into different products. But the ability for these artifacts to then do the work that maybe, imagine if someone was tapping on your shoulder all the time. Instead of having to deal with that all the time, now you have somebody that they can refer to something. And what is really beautiful, we're seeing are collaborations cross-domain too. So not just within designers, but also designers, to developers, to content contributors, to authors, all different types of people within the domain to collaborate together. Photographers, illustrators, everyone who's touching the product. And then lastly, you have consistency across the system. So a good example is a really, really big tech company, right? Such as Google, Atlassian, right? The company that makes Jira, Confluence, your favorite software. The ability for products to have a similar cohesive look and feel really requires the use of a system to create that link, whether it's the same font that is being used, and not even just the same font, but which style is being used, right? The margins between the letters that are being set up, or even the line spacing between the different lines of font copy, or even just the size, right? The different cadences going from the big headline to a small body copy. How those are consistent and set across the system really makes a difference as to how everything looks and feels in the end. And every single detail of a similarity that ties one product to another product, for example, allows it to have a more shared visual language with one another. And then pathways to expand with a given guidelines. So thinking about scalabilities. Now, once we've created a language, we can expand outwards, right? Okay, let's see. So one of the methodologies that people have adopted into creating a design system is the atomic design methodology. Who has heard of this? Have you heard of it? Feel free to put yes or no in the chat, Y or N. And this is, yeah, people have heard of it. Oh, awesome. Everyone's heard of it. Okay, maybe I don't have to go through this. But for anyone who hasn't, okay, anyone who hasn't heard of it, is really this theory of starting with something really, really small and up to something that's really, really big. And all of these are elements that go into the system and how we document the system. And so how the system starts off with are these atoms, these little blocks of things that's whether on a website, an application, a newsletter, and working its way upwards into chunks of elements. So going from atoms, you move into molecules, and molecules are combinations of atoms that basically work together to achieve a certain function. So for example, I have the search button, but by itself, it might not do anything. But when combined with other atoms, right, a label, a form field, now I have a piece, a mechanism that basically works together, and that itself can be replicated across the system. Then we surface up into larger pieces where we have multiple molecules or atoms, a conjunction of it that work together in tandem. So as we think about websites, for example, the upper navigation bar, that itself now becomes an organism. Some people call it components, some people call it modules. And then as we grow bigger, we can create a template based off of different components, modules, or organisms, which are white labeled. White labeled meaning there isn't a specific type of content just yet. It's an architecture, it's a skeleton. We may want to replicate it for different uses. And then lastly, once we fill it in, we may also want to replicate that, right? Depending on our use case. And so this theory of atomic design is thinking through these different tiers and essentially thinking about how those also all fit within the context of a system design, a design system. Yeah. So what we had looked earlier of all these different examples of different people, Adobe, Google, you may see a lot of atoms, for example. You may see also some molecules, some organisms. And really the answer here is it varies, ultimately depending on what helps you, right, to scale and what helps you to work faster and more scalable. Awesome. Any questions on this one? If you Google Brad Frost Atomic Design, you can learn more on the web as well. There is a book, but pretty much just sums everything up in a nutshell. A little bit of skimmed cliff notes. Yeah, feel free to pop any questions if you have them into the chat. And so another thing to talk about are the types of design systems that exist. So today we're going to go a little bit deeper into Figma, but thank you for dropping that, Ivan. But there are also other ways that you can set up the system as well. And one thing that a lot of people now often forget, the dark ages, we had set up these design systems back in the day through offline artifacts, right? Before cloud computing, cloud just meaning information that's stored in a database somewhere, a server somewhere that's accessible to everyone, live at all moments, always on. And so we used to create these offline artifacts, most notably PDFs, right? People would have these things documented in PDFs, and then you have different versions, and then you share it out. And also when our design files were online, right, like Figma files are, and we had design files on everyone's local computer, we also stored artifact information that way as well. So people would have notes on iconography, typography, like all these different things, and have it stored in someone's local computer. And the last note can be outdated rather quickly. So this was really one of the biggest pain points. While it's very easy, quick to kind of lift off these artifacts at this level, version control was definitely one of the biggest pain points. So somebody would update one thing, and then somebody would not know that that update had happened. And then all of a sudden you have this file floating with different instances of it across many, many different computers and folders. And so the beauty of cloud and also live artifacts was really this shift towards information and data that is readily accessible live. And as it's updated in one channel, it is updated live and distributed for everyone to see. Yeah, can we think of this means, talking about atomic design, of pattern libraries as well? Yes. Yeah, I would say pattern libraries, some people use that to refer to pieces of design systems. Yeah, I think the principle of atomic web design is really this theory that we end up, right, with our final artifact, whatever it is, whether it's a whole web page, right, a newsletter, an app interface, or an app ecosystem. That is our end result. And ultimately, what we need to get there and what needs to be repeated, what I always say to people is it's always different per product, per team, per organization. And so based off of what we want to get to at the end, what are the pieces that repeat itself that get us to the end goal? Yeah, and I'll go more into some of the things to watch out in a sec. In the next kind of evolution of the design system shifted over into Figma. And there are many cloud systems such as Figma, Sketch is now in the cloud, Adobe XD, you have the Adobe Creative Cloud that has a really interesting design system that you can set up, also touches Photoshop, Illustrator, and such. And then Zeppelin is another annotation SaaS product. And these basically help to extrapolate. Envision is another one as well. These design products, design softwares are able to basically help organize information for us in a manner, and also at the same time can apply itself directly into our design files as well. And what's really beautiful is if I edit, let's say, an icon, right, somewhere in Figma, it can then percolate itself to different sections of different pages automatically as I update it in one place. But one of the hindrances when we use cloud platforms is that it is login permission gated within our organization or who we work with. And so as organizations or projects scales outward and you need more people touching it, the answer really is to think about what can I go beyond, right? This specific cloud software. And so that's why a lot of brands start to create these websites, these live artifacts that are accessible for everyone because they have so many people touching the system, and these details need to be live and accessible for them. And so these are usually brands that put their content on a specific URL, and it goes beyond the cloud, beyond access within an organization. But I will say, lastly, ultimately, what I will keep reiterating is different organizations, different products that you work on, and different team members all require different solutions. Yeah. And just because it's worked in one place or worked on one product doesn't necessarily mean if you replicate that exact same system or ways of working that you will get the same result. Yeah. And why this is really important is because I often find a lot of designers go into a space, something has worked really well, great, but replicating that exact thing into somewhere else, trying so hard, and then becoming defeated because that hasn't worked. And so what I always say, it's a two-way street. One way is what you're inputting into the system, right? You're taking your learnings, you're taking and extrapolating all the things that has happened, but you need the other way, right? The street that's coming back towards you as a pathway for you to get information into how you want to create the system that's going to work best for the team members, right? Everyone has a different way of working. Some people like to be more offline versus some people like to be more hands-on, right? It's very different for the team. So not just the collective or individual, but also the collective team dynamic, the collective group of people that you work with is also very different. Sometimes you work with a team of 2, sometimes you work with a team of 30, right? It's very different solutions for both, also different ways of working, collective culture. And lastly, the product. And why this is also really important to think about is something that is happening at Google, for example, right? Or Atlassian or Adobe. These companies with tons, hundreds of products under them will inherently have a different structure than an organization maybe that has one product. And so thinking about just what are you institutionalizing? What are you making into a system? Really, depending on your use case and what you're trying to solve, is going to be different based off of that as well. And so just to reiterate, is the inputs that's coming in that's going to really change and shift the way in which you create a system is ultimately dependent on the people, the individual level, the people at the team level, and then lastly, the product or what you're trying to create as a team. Yeah. Cool. So elements of a design system, I won't stay too far in here because we're going to go into examples really soon, but really there's so many pieces that go into this system, right? We can focus on just the pattern library portion, which is obviously icons, typography, images, photos, interaction design. I saw on Google's material library, they started putting information about sounds in as well. You can have responsive styles, how you're creating different interfaces for different screen sizes, and also 3D design. That's really big right now, and just how it sits within the space, what space you're creating, component library. So this is more of a development side versus design. So think about all of the pieces as well as not just the design, but also the code that come with it. You have all the different components, all the different pieces, mechanics, all the way up to just the dialogues, error states, indicators, or even the API, based the way in which you allow your system to be connected to other systems has documentations involved as well. And then lastly, this is the really important part, are some of the principles that go into your system, right? So oftentimes people like to talk about accessibility, perspectives on accessibility, all right? What is important? What has been implemented? Another one is best practices. So what I always love seeing are implementation of, let's say, icons or logos, different use cases that work. And sometimes I also see people do it in the instances that don't work. And it's just like, kind of odd sometimes, but it also helps inform, let's say, don't put this logo on top of a photograph, for example. You have to put it on white or whatever the details. Additionally, if it's a cloud system or if it's live on a website, usually having a section for news and updates really helps as well. So this helps to reinforce all the things that have been updated, as a part of different batches. And then you also add version numbers so that people can align with one another which ones they're looking at, especially if it's an offline artifact. And then lastly, user experience. So what is the perspective on the best user experience for this particular product, right? Or for your particular audience? Cool. One question that comes up time and time again, especially for people, is do I need to create or not create a design system? And there are so many things on the web and things that you can reference or, to create from scratch or to keep something going. And ultimately, again, this really depends on what I had mentioned, this triad of who as an individual is a part of the process, who is the team, the collective culture, and what is the thing, the product that you're trying to accomplish together. And basically based off of that, it should allow you to kind of gauge where you're going to want to sit, whether you're going to want to implement something brand new, or you're going to want to adopt and evolve something. And I always say this over and over again, especially for new designers, is what works for one team may not necessarily work for another. And usually as designers mature, that is one attribute that's a part of design maturity, is this understanding and comprehension of opening oneself up to hearing what it is that's happening around you, right? Not just the design problem that you're trying to solve, but you're also solving for culture, right? You're solving for methodology, you're solving for process. And when a designer is able to listen beyond just the design challenge, but seeing everything that's around them, you essentially level up your capacity to create systems that can create change, not just within design, but organizationally. And lastly, testing, right? We always talk about, as UX designers, testing and learning is so important. And so just like testing and learning a product, you should also think of the design system as a product, right? So as you create something and no one is using it, instead of investing 100 more hours into it, right? The sooner you can listen and ask questions and understand what may be the barriers of entry, right? What is really complex? Why is it not being adopted? Will save you much more heartache and headache than to just invest and double down more time, thinking that as you spend more time, that other people will spend more time. One of the biggest fallacies of work. And just to talk about the vertices here, high cost, more customization, high brand differentiation. So whenever we create something from scratch, there's always a high cost implication that has high cost, meaning cost of time, cost of money, cost of labor, customization capabilities. So usually when we create it from scratch, we have the capacity to customize how we want it. And same thing with brand differentiation. If we want something specific to our brand or organization, it really depends on how much labor we're willing to put in. Yeah. And so this slide, I think is really important to preface before we get into the Figma. And I think this touches on some really interesting insights that took me many years to learn, which was understanding when and when not to use a particular system. Yeah. And again, going back to one of the biggest lessons for me has been understanding and being able to listen to all the different inputs around me to then create a system that's going to work best for this particular individual, team, and project. And so a couple things. The first one is when we are in a mode of ideation and innovation, when we are quickly iterating on something, this is where I recommend not to have a system at all. And why this is really important is because sometimes I see designers as you create websites, right? You start creating components, you start creating a style guide, you start creating all these things. But what has not been done yet just has been this vision of what you're trying to create. And so sometimes I even see UX designers as a part of creating wireframes, starting to instantly create all these components, all these systems, but you haven't even vetted out as a whole if it's going to even look good yet. And you've already started to create a system around it. And so a good analogy is, imagine we're trying to build a car, we're trying to innovate a car. And as we are innovating and we're thinking, oh, this is the engine, we then put the engine into an entire production schedule. And now we have 1,000, 5,000 of those engines being built, but we haven't even finished building the prototype of the car. So as you can imagine, as we build the car, we're going to make some modifications to it. But then if we already have purchased 1,000 of these engines for this car that we're trying to innovate, how much more tied to the particular engine are we going to be, right? Versus the bigger picture of design itself. Yeah. And so my recommendation to you all is, if you are in the state of ideation innovation, do not get yourself bogged down with design systems, because that is going to hinder your capacity to innovate and ideate. Yeah. Oh yeah, I just used to do that when I started learning, just trying to systemize everything as a first step, but nope, it does not work for all the reasons you're saying. So +1 there. Yeah. So then my recommendation, so then the question could be, okay, so when do you actually start using design system? And my recommendation is, when you start seeing a pattern, then create the system. Yeah. And this is also really important as part of just being agile and being quick, especially as designers. One thing that you're going to keep practicing over and over is just the ability to throw things down, test it, learning it, and then moving on. But let's say putting together a wireframe or a concept, you start creating a system and all these pieces, and you end up testing it with consumers and they're like, this is horrible, I don't get anything. You invested like 100 hours into creating a whole entire wireframe complex system, and you're like, oh shoot, now I have to scrap it. And so my suggestion is, when you get to the point of proofing and getting things somewhat in like an 80% stage, and you start having things starting to get towards the finalization of it, that's when you should start thinking about creating a system. So that as you create, let's say, beyond just a couple pages, right? Beyond like 2 or 3 pages, but creating 10, 20, 30, 40, a system will help you scale to that point. But when you're creating a single web page, for example, or a single newsletter or a single app screen, you should not be thinking about a design system whatsoever, because it's going to really hinder your capacity to create rather quickly. Any questions there? I think this is a really important piece that especially new designers I see sometimes get so stuck in just the capacity to be able to do a design system that you lean and index so much on it. Just because, here's a great saying, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Yeah. Just because you can create a design system at that moment doesn't mean that you should be doing it. Yeah. Next one. Lack of org maturity. So one thing to also understand as part of creating a design system is the system, right? Either the individual team or the product or the larger organization company that will help maintain it. So one of the responsible design choices we make is creating something that is holistic in nature, that has the resources, that has the capacity to be maintained. The last thing we want to do is just create additional work for everyone else. And so this is a little bit of conscious collaboration that we are instituting into our work so that we can help other people. Ultimately, our vision is to get us from point A to point C, D, E together as a group, versus you were able to get from point A to point B, and now everyone is really struggling to get from point A to point C. And so thinking about the bigger picture, you're able to figure out, right, at this moment, what do we have the capacity to create? And so a big part of this is the more complex of a design system that you're creating really requires the bandwidth from people to maintain it. If there are no dedicated people, teams, dedicated allocation, right, whether it's a few hours a week to maintain it, it's not going to be maintained, the short answer. And so as a part of maybe pitching a design system, you also really have to pitch the bandwidth that is needed to maintain and update it. Yeah. The next point is complexity. So especially for us as individuals, when we create a design, when we create artifacts, we understand how to work around it. We understand what pieces are where. It's like a house, right? Everything in our house, we totally understand where it is. Everything has a place, or we think it has a place. And when somebody new walks in, they're like, what the heck? And we can make out, right, relatively where some things are in a house that we go to. Usually, near the sink, there's a soap somewhere, right? Near the dishwasher, there's usually a drawer that has, utensils, forks, knives, something like that. So there's some patterns that we have to locate things in a house. But relatively speaking, we won't know where everything is. So as a big part of this, whenever we create a design system that we want other people to work on, we really have to invest also the time to not just educate another person, but really create the annotations, the documentation, all these things that really help somebody who has zero knowledge to get into it and using it. And so again, thinking about your bandwidth, start small, right? You don't have to start trying to solve everything and all these issues all in one documentation, but really starting with something that everybody can start working with. And again, just like testing and learning methodology says, is just put it out there, see how it resonates, and then use that learning to then update it. And this is going to help save you so much heartache and headache, because the more you can put things out there, observe what's happening, and then make more educated decisions on, okay, this team is doing this way, this individual is doing it this way, this product organization is doing it this way, you're able to then use those insights to then create a stronger design system for everyone. Yeah. And it takes a lot of time to teach and adopt. And you have to also give that runway. You can't imagine adoption is going to happen tomorrow. And then lastly, when we touch, I have the thing repeated twice. It might have been something else I might have undone. Oh, well. Whoopsies. But anyway, that concludes kind of the overview of design system. Is there any question? Any question before we get into the Figma? Now is going to be the hands-on portion. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And let me get some of the links for everyone. While you ask your questions, I'm going to grab the Figma links for us all. One sec. Any questions? So I have 3 style guides for us today that we're going to go through, and we're just going to play around. And yes, the car analogy. Feel free to use that one too. Yeah. Imagine we're building the next generation of Tesla and we created one form of a battery. Oh, for some reason that link, copy that whole link and paste it into Google. For some reason it's not. So that's one file. There's going to be 3 files that we're going to work through together. Imagine, we're creating the next generation of a car. And then as soon as we've sketched it, right? Think about it this way. As soon as we sketched it, we start putting into production and we start launching thousands of that product. We are in for a bad time. Because then we're so stuck on it. And this quote from our book club reading that I go back to time and time again that is really powerful is, we are hired as designers to make things usable, not to make art. And sometimes we imagine when we are hired in organizations, it's all about the art, the complexity, all of that. And so, so feel free. I dropped the link of the files and I will share my screen going into it. Cool. So we're going to go into the Figma tutorial, and feel free to just continue watching if you just want to watch, or if you want to play around with the Figma, more than happy to have you. But we're going to talk about a few things today in the next hour, which is going to be first creating styles within Figma, using styles to consolidate text, color, effects, organize our grid, using proper naming structures to organize. We're going to also create components with constraints, auto layouts, variants, and then ultimately thinking about how this works in a collective ecosystem of a file to file manner. Yeah. Lots to touch on. Okay. Awesome. And then let me launch my Figma. Cool. So this will be the first file that we are going to be dissecting. And all of these files you can find in Figma in Community. One of the really, really beautiful things about Figma, they've also created the community feature that houses files from a bunch of different contributors. And it's a great way that I recommend, especially for new designers, to download files and break it out, right? Break it down and observe how people are organizing stuff, linking stuff. And if you ever are confused with how to use, a particular feature of Figma, my recommendation is just download people's files and just play with it, break it apart, mess it up, and from a learning curve capacity, I found that has a lot of better memory retention than just starting from a blank canvas. Yeah. But, everyone learns through different styles. Cool. So first off, we're going to talk about the basic structure of Figma. And when we have nothing selected, and also if you haven't made an account, you'll probably be prompted to make an account once you click into the link. And so feel free to make an account and then follow along with us, or just watch our screen. Yeah. First, we're going to talk about how do we make these components here on the right, these text styles, these color styles, these effect styles, these grid styles. And quite simply, I'm going to click into this examples tab and then just go into one of the examples. Quite simply, it is this: using all the different properties and attributes that's in the right pane to determine it. And so whenever I create a blank file, and what you can do if you're in any of these files, feel free to go in here on the left and create a plus sign and then create a page in that artboard. You can then just mess things around on that playground without having to touch any of the other stuff. Yeah, awesome. So as I'm creating a blank canvas, and as I start typing some stuff here, sometimes it has properties enabled, but oftentimes when it's a blank canvas, it doesn't. So then we'll have all these properties built out. We'll have the font style here, the colors, all these different properties. Select plus here, basically it allows me to have different attributes, right, laid in. And so basically creating a style is super easy, where all we have to do is select this 4 dots. And then once we've selected, we can either pick from what's in the system already, or we can create something brand new where we click plus, right? Where we create a new style. All of these have been made the same exact way. And so feel free to click into any of these font styles. And basically what it does, it pre-packages all of the attributes of the font into that style. But the fill, stroke, and effects are all independent of each other, which is really great, because if I wanted this to be another color that I've saved into the system, right? So these are all these colors that have been saved into the system, then I can select those and voila, the colors will change. And what's really cool about the colors is that I can have colors, and I can also have images, and I can also have gradients. And so, I mean, just for our file, this is just a playground. Feel free to make additional styles as well. And if you do, just put your name on it so that people know they don't want to mess around with it. Yeah. Same thing for stroke. Stroke is, let's increase this font size actually. Stroke is this outline that's around here, and basically we get to define the color property. And so here we can also pick the different pre-selected colors as a part of the style. Or if we don't want to, simply we click this clip to detach. We can select our own color, right? If I want it bright blue, and then basically we click the plus sign, or sorry, not this plus sign, this plus sign. And then we can name Stevens, and that automatically will put color, ta-da, into the list. This is pretty straightforward. You can have these applied for styles, colors, outlines, font sizes, and they all go here. Now, an interesting part is based on how we name these individual styles, they can be put into these drop downs, right? So all we have to do is to rename it, we either just double click this when nothing is clicked, or we click and we click into this style, and then we click these little lever things, these properties, and we can name it. And so what I want to do is I want to put it into this text dropdown, right? So all I have to do in the naming convention is go here, rename it, and do text /. And that's it. And then it puts it into the text dropdown. So all these dropdowns are basically a /, like a folder, and it helps to organize. If we have, let's say, 30 different color styles, we can have different colors that are saved under different folders. Cool. So it looks like there's one for images and then one for text. Super, super easy. Super intuitive. Any questions? Any questions? Everyone's super clear? Cool. So let's break down this file. So this is a great example of just a typical style guide. So we have different headlines set up, right? We have titles, heading 1, heading 2, and header 1, header 2, header 3. This is a convention that's carried over through web design. And so on digital web, we have different HTML properties that are defined as H1, H2, H2, H4. And so that's where the convention comes from. We have subtitles, we have bodies, and essentially these are different properties that people have set up that they want to go into the file. And then here on the right, they've taken colors that they want in the system, and they've blown this out into a page, right? My recommendation is it's really nice to create, if you want a style guide, to create it in these pages such as this, not just so in Figma, we can have all these styles here in this system, but I will also recommend just having a page where you create all of these different properties and just organize it in a way that if anybody new, let's say, wants to see, you know, what things are used for, how are things getting set up, they can go into this section, this annotated section, to understand more about your properties. Yeah. And sometimes when you set it up, and this isn't set up in this way, but you can set up using different sizing of the artboards and have it match. And then you could potentially export it and then send it to people using, you know, like an offline method, for example. Sometimes when I work with clients, if the clients don't have access to Figma or don't know Figma, it's really good to create these artifacts to be exportable as well. So then the clients can have them. Maybe they might not necessarily do anything with it, but it's a great way for just making alternative things. Cool. So as you can see in this particular style guide, they set up font pairings and they also set up grid spacers. So this one, they're just thinking through different spacing properties that they're using to divide different elements, and then the grid system. We didn't talk about this, but the grid system is another element that we can also define as a property. And a grid system is basically just, broadly speaking, lines that are lines going horizontally or vertically that are in our artboards on Figma that help us to create designs across different systems and conventions. And so when I have a blank artboard, for example, here, there is no grid set up just yet. And so if I click into one of the frames, I can actually set up a grid like this. By default, it'll give me this square grid system. If I want to create something responsive, right? Typically, you use a 12-column system because of the way it can divide into different numbers. And we have another video on that in our Figma tutorials. But basically, we can set something up like this. And we can then, again, just like a style, we can save it, Stevens grid. And then we created a style that we can apply. So what's beautiful is as we create a new artboard, we can then select these 4 dots and then select my grid. And why it looks a little bit different is because the properties that's been set, if we look, are all based on dynamic values, type stretch. But if I put center here, it should match from one screen to one screen, right? On the right, on the left, stretch. Awesome. Any questions there? We're zooming past this stuff. And then feel free to reference this video in the future as well. And the next stuff that we haven't talked about before are constraints, right? So constraints are basically properties that we can set up and define for components, right? These components. And as we stretch or we change kind of the sizing of it, they automatically reflect the update. So what I can do is feel free if you want, as you're exploring, just select an element, you can copy it, you can go into your little playground and paste it in, right? Like that. Yep. And then as we look to the right here, constraints are basically like what I mentioned. As we shift and we morph, like we make wider, we make taller, different objects, we're setting the properties of what the elements within that grouping and what they're going to do. So a good example is, let's say I'm making a canvas like this, and then I'm doing a navigation bar up at the top. And when I make my page longer, right here, I'll just write nav just so that it's crystal clear what it is. And this is just a random web page. As I make my page longer, it should not do anything, but by default, it's oftentimes set up like this. Usually set up like this so that when I stretch, yeah. So sometimes when I just set up an object in the space, when I stretch it, the canvas, it also does that. But when the page gets long or web pages get long, we don't necessarily need the navigation to also get long. And so what we often do is we, in our grouping, we select the parent group. So the group of the higher order level kind of encompassing parent group. And then we want to click into the individual objects, just making sure it's underneath. And then we set the constraints up. So what we're going to say is, hey, I want you to anchor to the very top, right? So this is what the top means. And this means the up and down behavior. So this means if I pull it down, what is it going to do? So if I click top, it's going to stay to the top. If I hit bottom, it's going to stay towards the bottom. So it's going to keep this space. So what I mean is this, right? So it's keeping this distance here the same. Yeah. Does that make sense? So if I hit top, then it anchors to the very top as I stretch. Cool. And then same thing for left and right. Because I have it set up as scale, it is scaling as I shift the width of the canvas. But if I do left, it will keep the size the same. And then as I stretch, it's just going to stay the same size. So these constraints are really, really useful, especially as we move into the next part of today's presentation of creating design systems and components now. Yeah. And so, for example, as we create objects that are components, and components in Figma are reusable elements that we've predefined. And to create a component, it's as simple as creating a group and then either right-clicking and creating a component or clicking this little flower diamond thing up at the top. And then when it has this purple frame around it, it means it's saying, hey, now you can reuse me everywhere. Yeah. Cool. So these components, this author for this file has done a really, really great job of setting it up with all these constraints. And so as I stretch it, you see the button, it stays centered. Alternatively, let's say I mess it up. I can detach this so that it's not an object anymore. Okay. Okay. And then I set the constraints. What's happening? Okay, here we go. It's nested. Right. There's even a space between both of them. Interesting. I see. I can essentially set it in a way where these objects will resize differently. You can't really see it, but let me see if I can. Yeah, they have icons to the left and right of it. Let's see. Yep. Cool. Okay. Cool. So there's so many more features and properties in this. So what I discovered was in these buttons, there's actually space for icons to the left and right of it. So that's another interesting thing to check out is if I have different features set up And auto layout is something that we had talked about before, but basically in this feature, it automatically collapses certain objects if I have them hiding. Cool. Okay, awesome. And then we're going to move on to the next file. But overall, this is a really interesting, just to summarize this file, I think they do a really good job of just creating an introductory style guide, which has things listed out, the styles in the system set up, right, that align with these things. And then just to make sure that they're set up, right, we can click the object and just making sure the right style is applied. The instance we click on something, and then let's say we see these font properties, that means that there is no style applied. Yeah? Awesome. Cool. Moving on to next file, Ant Design System. I'll post this one into the chat. And this was the second one. Now we're going to look at question. What can constraints be applied to? So far, you've shown it with objects and sounds like also in components. Yes, so we can basically create constraints to be for many, many different elements. So let's say I create a component, right? Like a module that I have, let's say this is a picture and I might have some, text below it that's like boom, 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 like that. So then I can group this individually as a frame or group, different workflows for different styles, basically almost the same thing. For the constraints, now, as I resize this, right? Let me do a group. It's going to show the resizing better. Yeah. So by default, when I group something, it's just going to resize everything together. But this isn't what I want to do if I'm, let's say, creating a component. Let's say there's like a blog article, right? The image isn't going to change sizes each time it gets longer. And this is within the page. And so what I'm going to do is once I've grouped everything together, I'm going to click into the object, anchor it to the top, and then I'm going to anchor this to the left and right. So it's going to stretch. Actually, I'm just going to center it. Yep. This should be to the top. One sec. Now my properties have changed. Why is it not? It should be scale top. Okay, there we go. So now it's stuck at the top, right? And then because I have set up to be the left and right to, let's say, be center, now as I stretch it out, it's going to stay in the center. But now I have to take care of these four. So then I go back here and I'm going to also center these. And then I'm going to say, hey, make these always stay at the bottom of the box. And now when I pull it, it stays the same size and it stays at the bottom now. Yeah. Does that help? I did apply the elements. It was weird. It was not. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I was doing that earlier. Mystery. Any questions? So these are just constraints. Also, sometimes I've noticed when working with other people's files and stuff like that, you might have auto layouts set up, and it's a little bit of what I always say is replicating it, changing the different shapes and sizes, and then you can figure out what to do. But what I always like to do, here's a trick. I always like to, when I'm creating it, let's say like a button, and I want to make it a component that can have the proper constraints applied, usually I like to set it up like this, where I set up the element and then I'll just set up the button like as such. And then what I'll do is I'll create this into a component. So that's a key command for creating a component where you click it and you click create component, which I did. Now it's purple. I make different instances of it, right? As such. And then I stretch these out as such. Or make this longer or shorter. Make this shorter this way. Make these shorter, right? And so as I update the constraints of my files, such as this, right? Now I will see, depending on the way in which it's resized, instantly what's going to happen. So again, to repeat, what you can do is you create the component first, replicate it in different sizes, and then play with the constraints. And what this does, it basically allows you to see immediately in different sizes, what is it going to do? So for this one, I'm going to adjust and play with the background a bit, and I'm going to make it scale, making sure it fits the size. And then the word button, I'm going to make it smaller so I can see what it's doing. Here we go. And I always want it to be centered, but always centered vertically. There we go. This one's working, but look, it doesn't work at all of these. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click it, and I'm going to set all of these properties, right? Center. So now do you see, as my object changes sizes, it's always vertically centering. So this is a really interesting way of just working with a component, just making sure you have the proper constraints set up. Yeah. Also the fill for this one's not working properly because it's a little shorter, but then it's going still all the way across. So I'm going to click into that object, and then I'm going to, instead of anchor left, I'm going to say scale, match the width, right? Same thing for this. Instead of left, I'm going to say center, right? So now I have all these different variations, and now they're still stuck in the center. So now what's beautiful is, as I resize it, it's all set up with the right properties that I want at all sizes. Does this make sense for people? Little hack. Yeah. So once again, what I do is I create the object, make it a component. So I'll do it with this one. So I'll create the object, make it a component, click create component. And then what I'll do is I'll create various sizes, and it's okay, it's breaking. You want it to break so that as you break it, I'm gonna make it extra long here. I'm gonna make this one. Yeah, I'm just gonna do this. I could define now the properties of what it does. So for the width of the white, I always want to stay within the gray. So instead, I'm going to scale it. The white bars, I want it to do the same thing. So instead of center, I'm going to scale it, or I'm going to do left and right margins. So it aligns and sets the left and right margins. It matches it. And then it looks like seemingly it's working well for the rest. But let's say I want these to stay underneath this top element. I'm going to just go in here, go into the group. Instead of the bottom, I'm going to say top. So then it's always going to be right below. Yeah. And so then once I'm done, I could just go in, delete all of these replicas. And then now I have a element that does what I want it to do. Yeah. So that's just one way of just, because sometimes what the weird trick is when we apply a certain constraint, we don't know what it might do to another resizing, for example. So one of the dangers that I've learned through just like trial and error is it may look like it's working at one size, but then all of a sudden when I make it even thinner or much bigger, wide, or much taller, then the constraint didn't work. So with that said, sometimes one of the constraint values may look like it's giving us the immediate effect that we need it to, but until it's under the right use case, then it starts to break. So yeah, this is just something that I've created as a system of just like play with all the various sizes you can, making sure it all looks good. You don't touch any of these, you just touch the main one. Yeah. Cool. Figma hack. Yes. And this will save you so much heartache. Yeah. Cool. So going on to the next file that I posted in the comment about 10 minutes ago, the AMP file. So this one is a little bit more robust. Yeah. This has a whole icon library set up and buttons as variants. which are really interesting, which we'll talk about next. And then all of these checkboxes and these properties set up. And so feel free now just to go into here, click the plus, make an artboard for yourself so that you can play with some of the files. Yeah. The first thing I will talk about are symbols or components that we create in the ecosystem. And what's really nice about creating components is that it fits within a library already. So as we create components and we go into assets, basically everything we created that's reusable goes into this library, right? Here. Also, same thing here, because I created these as components, it's also in here, yeah, under my name. See? And so this asset dropdown is kind of just a repository of all the things that you've created into a component. One thing that you should know is that the naming of this object, going back to layers, the way in which I named it is going to be ultimately the way in which it is organized in the system. Yeah. So it's the very same thing as like the textiles here. So regular, all of these, basically they had to name it regular /12px. Ultimately, the way I name each individual icon here is going to change the way in which it shows up here. And why this is really important is because going back to my artboard, when I click into a component, I have this really nifty tool here that's right under this dimension toggle here that allows me to select between other elements in the same folder. Yeah. So why this is really important is, let's say I'm creating a system in which I have an icon library, right? And when I have an icon library, I don't want other things that aren't icons in here, because then if I select it, it like breaks the whole system. Because I'm going to click out for now, just for the sake of, but like if I have an icon here and I have a whole website that I've made, but then in the drop down, there's a tooltip. It doesn't really make sense, because then it'll break the whole system. It's not the right dimension. It's not the right properties. And so going back to the way in which we set it up, what's really cool is, let's say, let's do the whole navigation example again. We're building a website. I'm just going to write nav just to reiterate it. And in our navigation, we usually have a search icon up at the top, search. Here we go. And so if I have like multiple of these icons, if I've named it properly, such as this, so this is in the folder icon, which is in the folder outline, or in the folder outline, which is in the folder icon, then I get to select objects within the same folder. Yeah, does that make sense? I can switch it to pushpin. I can switch it to send, right? So I will show you the example of if I change the name, right? So this mail icon, I'm going to change the name right here to not icon, right? Not icon /outline /mail. So if I go back to here and I want to search for the icon, it's not there anymore, right? Question, KM, how did you add the icon to your frame? Yeah, so if you just click into any of these, you just copy it, Apple C, right click, copy, and then you could just paste it. Super simple. And the beauty of a component is if you copy a component and you paste the component, it pastes it as a child element. Yeah, Command C, exactly. Command C, Command V. And all of the little children are now able to follow suit of whatever you set up as happening to the main parent. Yeah, they're all interlinked. Going back to how I named it, so if I go to assets, right, the way in which I named it, now it shows up like this in not icon /outlined, but it's in the icon because it's set up as part of the layer. Yeah. Any questions? So this is in terms of just like naming it. We're going to move on to variants. This one gets a little confusing. but just bear with me. So to summarize this portion of it, icons and elements that we want to organize components in the same system, the way in which we name each individual object will allow us to swap different components, different objects between one another easily. Yeah. And I like to make sure I do this for icons. I always do this also for prototype elements. Yeah. So if I'm making a really big complex prototype and there are elements that's a part of it, such as navigation, header, footer, all these things, I usually like to make those into components too that I can repurpose. Yeah, cool. So next thing is variants, right? The really cool thing about variants is this is the example use case of how to use it. I have an object, and the new thing that I haven't seen are all of these little things, right? So we initially had this, just the component drop down here, but we didn't have all this, right? Type, state, size, content. And the point of creating a variant is there are objects within our design space, design system, that have different properties that we want to have as different states. Maybe it's either through the program or through our design. And usually with stuff that's really, really straightforward, such as like buttons, form fields, toggles, those things we can create into these properties. Yeah. And so what's really cool is these we could customize to whatever word we want. And also whatever word we want, we can have it look whatever we want it to be. And so we could essentially say type is rainbow, crazy. Like we can name it to be whatever we'd want, and it could do whatever we'd want. So the combinations are endless. So primary default, right? So what they've done is in the system that they've created a style for a primary button. They've created a style for a dash button, created a style for a text button where it's only text, and then created a style for link. You see? So in this ecosystem, basically they've tied together all hyperlinks together. Yeah. As a part of that, they also have different states that they've created. They have a hover state, a focus state, a press state, a loading state, a disabled state. These are all really, really great because this is what developers end up creating. And then the variant part of it is really great is because we can edit this library and this will automatically propagate itself to all of the designs that we have. Yeah. And so imagine if you have like 100 pages, 100 web pages, all of this would be able to propagate everywhere, which is beautiful. Yeah. We also have the size. We have the default size. We have the large. We have the small. And these are all predefined, yeah, by the person who made this file. And then we have the content. Label only, icon with label, see? And then they have the icon here. Awesome. So that's a use case of how to use variants. Next is how do we create these variants? And so variants will end up like this, and it gets a little confusing, but just bear with me. I'm going to describe just like at a high level. When you see this dotted line around it, what it's trying to do is saying in this fence, in this perimeter, these are all the elements that are all going to be toggleable with one another. So they're all interlinked with one another. Where we place it, it can be wherever, but what it's going to do is it's always going to want to be within this artboard that we've created. And then we can also change the size of this. Basically, it's just an artboard. Let me move this back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variant from scratch. So we have a button that we want. Sometimes I look at the word too long and then I don't even know how to spell it properly. Button is doing that for me right now. Yeah, cool. Cool. So then I'm going to group it, right? Typical grouping it. I'm going to create it into a component. And then the next thing is here. This is the variance property, right? So simply I'm going to create plus, And then what it's going to do is it's going to create this first second instance for me. And so what I can do is I can now change the style of the second one, right? Maybe I want to create the off state. So I'm going to say, hey, this is what it's going to look like when it's off. And then basically I'm going to name it, this is the off state, and this is going to be the on state. And so what happens is if I have this component that I'm using, right? What is happening here? If I am using it, here we go. Now I have this property, toggle on off. I forgot to mention, if you do on and off, it automatically changes it to this toggle for you, which is interesting. Watch, I can name it as on one instead and off two, just whatever name that I want, then it's gonna do this for me. I could essentially name this rainbow, and I can name this not rainbow, and then basically it will set that up as the two toggles for me. So this is how variants basically work. And then to name this property basically is just renaming the file objects, right? The properties that we have. Cool. Any questions? Any questions? Awesome. So that's this file. Feel free to play around with it. I think they do a lot of really great job with the variants. And so this is just a really great example of just how to start creating variants that are really complex. Yeah. Such as this one, this form field just has so many, oopsies. Oh, I put it in the wrong place. This form field has all of these variants. You can make it smaller. You could add an icon to the left. You could add the typing state, or you can do the focus state. So they've done a really, really great job with the form fields. So check that out, play with that. Yeah, awesome. And then the last thing that we're going to go over with our time that we have today is this one, the iOS design system. Hope you're all learning a bunch today, the design system. And then again, what I recommend is as you're creating pages, usually my workflow and what helps me is as I'm, let's say I'm on a project, they're like, you have to create, all these web pages. The first thing I will do is I'll create the page, and then however I create the page design, it'll be like blah, 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 blah. You create a page, you create designs. It's like beautiful, it's not really that beautiful right now, but you get the point kind of. So then I'll create the page, right? And then I will review the page with other people. But when it's a single page on its own, I do not make anything into components just yet, because I know there's going to be things that's going to shift. There's going to be things that's going to evolve. There's going to be things that will get depreciated, get removed. And it's not until I start making multiple pages. Sometimes I even let go just like a handful of pages. I'm just going to change the color just for the sake of our tutorial. But my workflow is as I'm creating pages. So one of my clients, I'm creating a gigantic website for them. When I was doing the set of reviews for them in the beginning, as I was creating just a couple pages for them, I was still not creating components for them just yet, because I realized we're going to iterate so quickly. We're going to modify, we're going to change many things. And it wasn't until I started creating more than, I forget what the threshold for me was, like 3 or 4 pages, that I started to create a component for them. So at first I would just like copy and paste this, and these would be individual objects. But a great workflow is once you get to the point where you're like, okay, these are pretty set in stone. They like it, nothing's going to change that much, then let's make this into a component. And then I will make this into a component. And then I will go in these, just click this, and then I will just copy it. And then here's a trick. If you copy an object from one frame and you want it to be in the same place in the next frame, just click the artboard and then paste it it'll paste it directly in the same spot. Yeah. And then the key is once you get to a threshold where things repeat enough times that you yourself will save time by creating a component, then create the component. Yeah. But here's the other thing too, is when you can easily go down the variance rabbit hole where I'm like, okay, now all these are variants and like all these things. Again, until you see the multiple instances of variants being used in all your comps, then create it as a variant, right? Don't create the variant, the component, all these reusable things until it is more codified and set up in structure. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you invest so much time in the setup, it's so hard to instantly tear things down and switch it up. And especially when you're early on in the project, you have to be more rapid and be more iterative. And some people will argue, well, I'll just spend time. It should make me iterate faster. But the other psychological thing is sometimes we get so attached to things we invest time on, right? It's a part of this fallacy called the sunk cost or sunk time cost fallacy, where the more amount of time we spend on something, it directly affects the way in which we can let go of something. As a psychological phenomenon. And so when we invest so much time into creating components, for example, we become so attached to it that we have really hard time letting it go. So as a part of being a designer, being a flexible designer, being a designer who tests and who wants to learn, my recommendation is you have to sometimes create that distance for yourself where you're kind of detached and you're like you can still kill it. It's like fine, Yeah, you get it, Aria. Yeah, you have to safely distance. Yeah, sometimes yourself from being too attached. Not saying you shouldn't fight for things ever, but another big lesson that I learned that took me many years is pick and choose your battles wisely. Some of the things you do not want to impale yourself against the sword for, right? Some things you may want to, but really pick and choose your battles accordingly so that if there's something that you're really passionate on, yes, push for it. But if you keep pushing for every single thing all the time that maybe not accommodates other people, then what it looks like from the outside in is you aren't taking other inputs from anyone else. And sometimes it doesn't create a good atmosphere for collaboration. Collaboration really, ultimately, give and take, right? Duality, two-way street. Awesome. Cool. So going into the last system, and I'm just going to just go over this at a high level, but this is just a really great example of a file that has comps created right here. And there's all of these things here. My suggestion to you all is go in. Some of these are objects and some of them aren't. This is a really great test file just to create some of these into components. Yeah. So just play with these, test it out, see what resonates and works for you. Yeah. I'm trying to see. They didn't create components in this one. Some of it did. Yeah. So use this as a file to then create components. Yeah. And then create the objects and layers. And these are the ones that haven't been created. So this is like a good homework file. Like you can call this H1, stuff like that. Understand that you're in a sharing mode. So if you are going to start creating the style, my recommendation is duplicate it into your system. So as you're editing it, you can, I forgot how to, does anyone remember how to replicate it? Or is it in home? I think it's in home. Yes. Okay. Got it. So if you have an object, right? So this should show up in your drafts, right? Recent or your drafts. And then all you have to do is click duplicate. And this will duplicate the file just for yourself so that you don't have to modify and play within an ecosystem with everyone else. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So that is the end of our Figma tutorial. Hope you learned something new. Opening up for questions. Any questions from people about design systems? Any challenges that you're all running into with design systems that I can help answer? It's definitely a really complex beast that, again, I will go back to different solutions for different individuals, different teams, different organizations, and different products. Yeah. And when you can put that lens on into understanding what are different inputs, you can then come up with the best solution that works for different scenarios. Any questions? Questions? And everyone has access to the YouTube, and all of this will be put up. It's funny, Aria, with all these like little, it's like all the little hacks to just like make life so much easier. It's like the copy paste thing. Saved me many, many times. Yeah. Yeah. And what's really nice, I forgot to touch on it, was once you've created a design system and components in one file, you can actually use that and then put it into other files too. So I've worked at many different organizations that had not just like one file, but like hundreds of files working across different teams. You have a team that manages the design system and nobody else can touch it. So a really good way, if you're trying to disaggregate and allow someone to mess up a design system, you have one file with all the properties, and then you have another file basically inherited. Yeah. Yeah, I only could tell myself these tips a year or two ago when I was still struggling with Figma. Yeah. Creating copy to play with constraints is genius. Definitely ran into a few issues with components resizing. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, that took me a while to learn because the constraints, the tricky part is one constraint may look like it works, but then it breaks all the other constraints. And I'm like, what happened? So yeah, it's create it as a component. Even if you don't need it as a component, what you can do is you can create the component, create all the different things, adjust the constraint properties, and then if you dissolve and detach the main one from the component and you delete the component, you then end up still with the object in the single instance with the right constraints. Yeah. So you don't end up having all these like extra things. And if you're still iterating, but you just really quickly want something with the right constraints, create it into a component, all the different sizes, modify it, get the right properties, detach it, it's back in, delete the component. You should be good to go. Yeah. When the design system is another file, how do you access those objects in design system? Is still copy and paste into your file. Yeah, it's a little bit of backwards system. Wondering if I can access. One sec. When you copy and paste it, it should automatically link to the system. And so let me see if it's showing up here. Yeah. Let me share my screen once again. Okay. So when you copy and paste stuff from one file to another, right? So I'm just going to go into here. I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to paste it into this, right? Oh, shoot. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go into here. I have component, paste it in, right? When I'm in the assets folder here, and when I see this book, it's also going to show up when I'm in this mode too. Hold on. There's a book here. It's not here anymore. I don't know. Anyway, so if you hit this book, basically it should tell you all the things that it's linking to. And so these are the colors that I've set in my system. It's not showing up because it has to be, so you have to have a setting where you have it set up as organizations. And once you set up organizations, that's what I forgot to mention, you can then set up properties within each organization. but you can't do it within drafts. You can pull properties from these two drafts, but the properties have to be at the organization level. Yeah, this is our organization, and you have to set it at the organization level. Yeah. And so what it's pulling is it's pulling, I have some colors I've set up as a property, and then you could toggle it on or off. And when you toggle it off, it takes off all the styles. Yeah. Constraints, major insight for tonight. Great. Yeah. Design systems can get really complex, and my recommendation is start small. Yeah. And don't make it overtly complex, especially if you're looking to have other people collaborate with you. If it's just for yourself and you're on a really small team and you're doing everything, feel free to make it how you need it to be. But if you really want other people to work with it, work with the file that you have, the system, the components that you have, start small. Yeah, start with 1 or 2 components and observe. How are people using it? How are people managing it? Based off of that, it should allow you to understand, okay, if this is working, let me push further here. If it's not working yet, what is it that's not working? And if some of the early kind of hurdles or issues can't get resolved, the worst thing you can do again is put more effort or double down on the same thing that you've been doing, thinking you're going to get different results. Yeah. Just putting more time in doing the same thing will not get different results. Yes. Thanks, Arnell. Awesome. Well, if there is no other questions, that's it for tonight. Have a good rest of your evening. Happy 2022. Let's see what's in store for us this year, Got through 2021. We can do it. Let's do it. And so we are here. Feel free to shoot us any questions via Slack to our organization. And yeah, we'd love to connect and help support everyone where we can. And with that, have a good rest of your evening. Recharge, energize, learn a little bit more Figma. And yeah, have a good rest of your January if I don't see you until next meeting. Bye.